Most new nuclear programs think vendor dependence is just part of getting started. But that is exactly how you end up with an owner team that can't challenge the vendor and is at their mercy every time something changes. So, in this video, I'm going to show you the exact system to build a smart owner organization from day one and bring capability in house the right way. I've seen this from the owner side in a massive new build program. And the reason we had critical capability in house when we started operating was because we planned for it from the beginning. Now, the way usually people frame this is completely wrong. They ask, should we rely on the vendor or should we do it ourselves? But this is not the real decision, because at the beginning of a new nuclear program, of course you are going to rely on the vendor for a lot. In many cases, you have to and should. They know the plant, they know the design, they've done versions of this before, hopefully, and your owner organization is still being built. So in the beginning, vendor support isn't really the issue. The issue is what happens next. Because if 5 years later or 10 years later, your team still cannot really challenge what the vendor is telling you, still cannot independently review important work, or still has to lean on them every time there's a change or emergent issue, then you don't just have support, you're totally dependent on them, which puts you in a much weaker position. The thing is, most people are so overwhelmed at the beginning of a project that they're only worrying about getting the right level of support from the vendor. But that's exactly how it starts. The best way to think about this is that the vendor should be your flight instructor, not your permanent pilot. At the beginning, of course you want an instructor. You want someone who has done it before, helping you get off the ground safely. But over time, more and more of the flying should shift to your team. Because if the vendor still has both hands on the controls, you didn't really build owner capability, you just bought some flying time. So the real question is, how do you use the vendor early without staying dependent upon them permanently? And I know that's a lot, because most organizations struggle with it, but I'll break it down for you into much more manageable steps so you can be ready from day one. The way I like to think about this is with what I call the owner capability ladder. Because bringing capability in-house is not something you do all at once. Instead, you move up in stages. At each step, a little bit more of the thinking, judgment, and work shifts into the owner organization. And over time, that's exactly how you build a team that can stand on its own. So let me walk you through that ladder step by step, because once you see the sequence, it becomes much easier to understand. All right, so the first rung in the ladder is contract the transfer. And this is where a lot of programs make a very expensive mistake. They treat capability transfer like a small piece or something that they can figure out later. Like, let's just get the reactor deal done, let's get construction moving, let's get through the big stuff. And then later, once things settle down, we'll work out the training, the shadowing, the tech transfer, all of the access, and everything else. But by then, it's too late. Because when the reactor deal is being negotiated, that is when your leverage is the highest. The reactor sale and construction package are the big prize. That's what the vendor really wants. Compared to that, all of these owner capability items are just a tiny mouse next to a giant elephant. Training programs, shadow assignments, embedded personnel, access to methods and tools, technology transfer, long-term support options. In the context of the overall deal, these are tiny pieces, but they have a huge impact in the long run, which means this is the moment to push for them. Because later, once the big contract is signed and the project is moving, these small items suddenly become much harder to negotiate because you've lost all of your leverage. And this is where new programs get caught. They start with limited internal nuclear capability, which is normal. But then they treat that as a reason to depend on the vendor, instead of using the vendor relationship to build the owner organization from the start. But this can apply across multiple areas like fuel procurement, safety analysis, chemistry, maintenance, operations, and many more. So from the beginning, everyone on both sides of the contract understand exactly where they're going. But that also means you have to get specific and not just say, we want training. I mean, actually starting to lay out what the transfer should look like. How many people are we talking about? Over what time frame? And in what phases? On what scope? What exactly needs to be transferred? Methods, tools, data, processes? How and where will the training be delivered? What options are retained for later? And many more. Now, not every one of these details has to be finalized right away, but at least general ranges and the structure needs to be there. Because if all of that is still vague at the beginning, then later when you actually want to build out the plan and capability, the vendor is going to say that it's not covered in the contract. So the lesson from rung 1 is simple. If you want independence later, contract for it at the beginning. And this happens only if the contract, team, budget, and model were all built for it. Once you've written the transfer into the contract, the next question is obvious. who actually is going to get that capability? Because that's the second rung on the ladder. Build the nucleus team. And this is another place where programs go wrong. They don't get the right people or they wait too long. They assume they can build the owner team later when it's closer to operations and handover. But that's not how it works. Capability isn't going to appear just a few months before. You have to start way before that. The ideal time to get started is very early, just after contract signing and several years before commercial operation. First, use a top team of just a few experts around the contract phase to shape the overall strategy itself. Then, bring in an initial layer of experienced managers who are specialists in each of the areas. And then, only after that, start hiring people who will eventually get the knowledge from the vendor. And that sequence matters here, because the goal is to build out a long-term local team that can eventually own the work, which is why you can't just hire whomever is randomly available. The best programs can get strong graduates from top schools who are highly motivated and excited to be part of a new nuclear project. I'd want people who want to build something long-term and not just treat it as another job. But this part is important because it's more than just getting fresh graduates. What makes this whole thing work is pairing them with leaders who have both management ability and real technical depth in the specific areas that the knowledge transfer is going to happen. So these leaders are not just there to supervise. They can actually understand what the vendor is teaching and can challenge it. And they can help the trainees better understand what is going on. Likewise, ideally, the training wouldn't be done in just one place. Some of it can be done at your offices and some at the vendors. That helps both sides understand the real work environment and adapt. It helps your team better understand what the vendor is doing and gives better access to their experts. And it helps everyone prepare for the later stages when more and more of that capability is going to start to shift across. So the real lesson from Rung 2 is capability transfer needs the right and complete team for that knowledge transfer to come across. Because the vendor can teach all they want, but if you have not built the best team to receive that knowledge, then you're just going to end up wasting time. And once you have the right people in place, the next question becomes, what should they do first? And the answer is not jump straight into doing the work themselves. The next rung is get trained, but also practice. This is another mistake people make. They think training is the same thing as capability. So the vendor comes in, they give presentations, they walk through the methods, they explain the theory, the logic, the principles, why certain work is done certain ways. And all of that is useful. But it's not really enough. It's a bit like trying to learn how to ride a bike just by watching someone do it a few hundred times. You can understand the theory of what balance is and how the pedals work. But as soon as you get up on the bike yourself, you're going to fall right over. And this is the mistake that so many training programs make. They train people, but they don't give them a safe environment to actually start doing the work. And then they topple over and wonder why. So to get around that, you need to provide some training wheels to get people started. For a new program, that next step is practicing in a simulated learning environment. So that means things like vendor-provided exercises, mock deliverables, and internal dry runs. And that matters because it moves people through stages. First, they get the fundamentals. Then they start learning how to actually perform the work. Then they start seeing how they would need to adapt it in real-world situations that are not as clean as the classroom version. Engineering safety analysis is a good example here. After sitting in a room and hearing someone explain why an analysis is done a certain way, but then also working through the exercises themselves, make mistakes, ask questions, and see where the understanding still needs improvement. But it's the same in any discipline: chemistry, maintenance, operations. Classroom knowledge isn't the same as capability. Training gives your team theory, but practice is what gives them competence. And that simulated work is the bridge between classroom knowledge and real early owner-side capability. Once your team has been trained and has practiced in a safe learning environment, the next rung is this: shadow and compare. This is where things start to get much more real, because a team does not actually know whether it understands the work until it tries to do the real work themselves. Can they do the real work in parallel with the vendor and then compare what comes out? The thing is, as anybody who's worked on an actual project can tell you, doing training exercises, even if they're really close to the real thing, isn't the same as working on a live project with moving parts. Things change and there's a schedule to keep. In our engineering example, have the team rerun the same analysis that the vendor is running on a real design. Because this isn't some sterile training environment, the team will end up learning so much more. Real design work never moves in a straight line. Inputs are changing and assumptions move around. There are revisions to documents. Major design inputs like cycle length change halfway through, and then how does your team react? And because they are doing the work in parallel with the official work that the vendor is doing, it's easy to compare the two. It also means that the vendor has the focus to know what's going on because he's facing the exact same problems and can give guidance on the difficult parts. The thing is, this is where some of the most important learning starts to happen. Using the right assumptions, picking the right inputs. Is the methodology working? Are they handling version control correctly? And if the results are different, do you understand why? And it's that last part where you'll start to see the biggest shift, because sometimes the difference comes from something you missed or from the wrong setup. But sometimes you'll find places where the vendor's work is wrong. And that's a huge moment when that happens, and it will, because now the team is changing from doing the work to really thinking about it and beginning to show solid technical judgment. So the lesson from this rung is simple. Shadowing is where you find out if your team can handle real design work without betting the real design on them yet. And once that starts working, the next rung is obvious. Get your people closer to the work and closer to the people doing it. Embed with the vendor. Because here is a problem that most people know about, but don't really think about how to solve. And that's that some of the most important know-how isn't written down anywhere in a training slide or in a procedure, because it's actually in just how people do the work. You can think of it as a bit like someone joining a restaurant and reading the employee handbook. On paper, they understand the menu, the hygiene rules, who does what, and where everything is. But it's very different from actually being in the kitchen during the dinner rush, seeing how the orders move, how people talk, who solves problems, and how everyone keeps things on track when something changes. And that's the same in nuclear. The best pattern I've seen in our engineering example is for people to be physically embedded at the vendor's offices. Then they're working inside the vendor's systems, inside their QA processes, going to meetings, handling revisions, and working directly with the vendor's engineers. But the difference is this time they aren't doing things in parallel. They're authoring the analyses. The vendor's still responsible for verifying the results, but your people are now doing the real technical work that becomes part of the plant record and design basis. And just as important, they'll learn the mechanics of all of the stuff around the assignments, like how the workflows actually function, where the documentation is routed, how technical issues are raised and resolved, and how experienced people who've been doing this their whole careers actually operate day to day. But the thing is, there's a huge part of doing this all themselves that most people don't realize until it happens. There's a big difference between doing exercises and having your name on an official analysis that actually is going to be used by the plant. That changes how people think and how they work, and it builds real pride in an organization that sees their name where the vendor used to be. Which I've seen this be a huge motivator for teams. So the lesson from this rung is surprisingly simple. Real transfer happens when the team is doing real work in the real environment on work that actually matters. Because that's how they learn how the real job actually gets done. And when their names are going onto products that become part of the plant record, that builds pride. Because now they can see their capability actually being used, not just practiced on the sidelines. And once they can do that, the next step is pretty simple, and that's to swap it. Lead the work with the vendor reviewing it. By now, your team should be fully capable of doing the work, but see if you can spot the problem. One day the vendor owns the scope, and the next day, the owner is suddenly doing all of it. It's a bit like suddenly promoting the co-pilot of your flight to captain. Even if they're super well trained, people do not want to hear that the senior pilot just stepped off the plane and said, "Good luck, everyone." So even if your team can technically do the work, you also need to show the internal stakeholders and give them confidence that this new team is ready to take everything on themselves. And possibly external stakeholders too, especially the regulator, who's going to want to see that any work related to safety is being handled properly. The best organizations don't treat this like a sudden cutoff. It's okay to start moving the work into your own systems and processes with your team doing the work, but keep the vendor still on as the verifier. And that gives two big advantages. First, if the team gets stuck, there's still a safety net. And second, it gives confidence to the rest of the organization and external stakeholders that this is a controlled transition, not some leap of faith. So the lesson here is simple. Move the work to the owner, but keep the vendor there to verify it. That gives you control without asking everyone to take a blind jump. And once that is working, the final rung is straightforward. Operate independently, but keep support available. And this is an important nuance, because a lot of people think bringing it in-house means going it alone and cutting off the vendor. But I've almost never seen any organization go completely in that direction. The goal here isn't to be isolated, it's to have ownership. So yes, by this stage, you should be able to run the work on your own. But even then, it can still make a lot of sense to keep some support options available. Serious organizations keep this option in case they have manpower issues or for some other reason they need extra capacity. They can still ask the vendor to perform the analysis. They can also set up regular operating experience and best practice exchanges where we can get together and compare what's going on. Another great tactic is to have the option to send your people to the vendor from time to time, or bring the vendor into your environment, so that the knowledge between the organizations stays fresh. And keep the option for technical support. Because the thing is, even when your team is fully capable, there are still going to be situations where the vendor's deep experience is incredibly useful. Maybe you run into something unusual, or want a second opinion, or just need a sanity check on how to proceed. That's smart risk management and building a healthier long-term relationship, although less as a customer and more as a partner. So the lesson from this last rung is simple. Independence does not mean cutting the vendor off. It means the owner can stand on its own, and vendor support becomes a choice, not a dependency. And that's really the whole idea behind this ladder. You're not trying to jump from dependence to independence overnight. You're building an owner organization that gets stronger at every step until support is optional instead of essential. And a capable team can keep a plant running for a long time. But what do you do if suppliers are interrupted and threatening operations? So if you want to know how to stop that, watch this video next to see exactly how to build in nuclear fuel security so supply risks aren't holding you back.